On the far edge of the Colton Ranch, a young woman named Mary Ellison scrubbed the last pan of the evening meal, her hands raw from the day's work but her heart soft as ever. She had been the ranch maid for nearly 3 years, rising before dawn, feeding the stock hands, washing, mending, and praying quietly each night that the world might somehow grow gentler than it seemed. But the frontier was not kind to gentle hearts. Out here, men built fences with fear as much as with wood, and strangers were measured by the color of their skin long before the content of their soul. That evening, as Mary stepped out with a tin bowl of stew for the dogs, she caught sight of a figure near the fence, half-shadowed, half-starved. A young Apache man, maybe 19 or 20, his ribs showing through a torn shirt, stood trembling beside a dying horse. He didn't speak at first. His eyes, dark and desperate, flicked to the food in her hands. Mary froze, aware of the rules. No savages allowed on the property, Mr. Colton's law. He'd shoot first, question later. But hunger knows no law, and mercy knows no master. Mary's heart moved before her mind did. You look near dead, she whispered, glancing toward the ranch house to be sure no one was watching. Wait here. She slipped back into the kitchen, ladled another bowl of stew, wrapped 2 biscuits in a rag, and crept toward the fence. When she handed it over, the young man's eyes softened, and for a moment, humanity bridged a canyon older than both their peoples. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, whispering a word she didn't understand, something like, "AA," and rode off into the dark. Mary stood there a while, heart pounding, wondering if she'd done right or wrong. But deep down, she knew right and wrong weren't decided by bosses or rules. They were decided by compassion. Morning broke with the sound of boots. Colton's voice thundered through the bunkhouse, "Mary, get out here." She ran to the porch, apron still on, where the foreman and a few ranch hands stood glaring. Colton, a thick man with a temper to match his whiskey, held up the empty bowl he'd found by the fence. "You think I don't know who did this?" he barked. "Fed one of them red devils on my land. You could have brought hell down on all of us." Mary's throat went dry. "Sir, he was starving." "He wasn't. I don't care what he was." Colton cut in. "You're fired. Pack your things and get off my property before noon." The men said nothing. Some looked away, others smirked. In the harsh silence of judgment, Mary gathered her few belongings, a worn Bible, her mother's shawl, a pair of boots too big for her feet, and left without a word. She walked to a small cabin a mile down the valley, the one she'd rented with her savings. She sat there the rest of the day, staring out at the endless plains, tears sliding down her cheeks. She had nothing. No job, no family nearby, no one to speak for her. But she didn't regret it. He was hungry, she whispered to the wind. That's reason enough. That night, a strange stillness fell over the valley. Coyotes went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mary, half asleep by the fire, woke to the faint beat of drums in the distance, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. She sat up, peered through the window, and saw lights flickering on the far ridges. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But as dawn broke, she realized it wasn't a dream at all. The horizon shimmered with movement, riders, dozens at first, then hundreds, their horses glinting in the morning light. Apache warriors, their feathers and paint vivid against the pale dawn. Were riding straight toward her cabin. The ground shook beneath their hooves. Mary's breath caught in her throat. She thought of Colton's warning, of revenge, of fear. She stepped outside, barefoot, trembling. The riders came to a halt a few yards away, dust swirling around them like smoke. At their head sat an older man in a red blanket and silver medallion, his face carved by years of sun and sorrow. Beside him, the young man from last night, the one she had fed. He dismounted slowly, eyes fixed on her, and spoke to the elder in Apache. The old man nodded, then turned his gaze on Mary. "You gave my son food," he said in halting English. "When others would not." Mary swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "He was hungry," she whispered. "Any mother would have done the same." The elder looked around at the ranch beyond the ridge. "Your kindness saved a chief's son. For that, we come not for war, but for peace." The riders dismounted, laying weapons gently on the ground. From their saddlebags, they drew baskets of corn, dried meat, woven cloth, and strange trinkets of stone and silver, gifts. One by one, they placed them at her feet. Mary felt her knees give way. "I don't understand," she murmured. The young warrior stepped forward and said, "Among my people, to feed the hungry is to feed the Great Spirit. You gave without fear. We came to show you that kindness does not die in the desert." His eyes shone not with anger but with gratitude. The morning sun broke over the hills then, bathing them all in gold. Behind them, the ranch hands had gathered near the fence, their mouths open in disbelief. Colton himself came striding up, gun in hand, but froze when he saw the silent army before Mary's door. The elder turned to him, his voice calm but iron hard. "You turned away mercy," he said. She did not. Colton's hand trembled on the rifle. He lowered it, shame flushing his face. Mary stepped forward, heart pounding, and said quietly, "Please. There's no need for more hurt. Let's end it here." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the elder raised his hand, and the riders began to sing, a low, haunting chant that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. It rose with the morning wind, filling the valley with something deeper than words, forgiveness. When the sun reached its peak, the Apaches turned their horses and rode back toward the hills, leaving a trail of dust and peace behind. Mary stood watching them until they disappeared into the horizon. Colton approached her slowly, hat in hand, his voice rough. "Miss Ellison, I was wrong." The words came like stones he'd never learned to lift. "You showed more courage than any man on this ranch. If you'd come back, the job's yours." Mary looked at him for a long time, then shook her head gently. "Thank you, Mr. Colton, but my place isn't behind someone else's orders anymore." She turned toward her little cabin, the one that had become, in a single morning, a place of honor. Over the next days, word spread through the territory. Some said 100 warriors had come. Others swore it was 500. A few claimed they saw the ground light up with the colors of the dawn as they rode. But those who'd been there, the ranch hands, the women in town, the children who'd watched from the hills, all agreed on one thing: they had seen a miracle born from mercy. Mary rebuilt her life quietly. With the gifts the Apaches had left, she opened a small shelter near the river, where travelers and the hungry could find food and rest. She never turned anyone away, not cowhands, not natives, not drifters. "A full stomach," she would say, "makes room for peace." Sometimes, the young Apache, whose name she learned was Taza, would visit. He brought her stories from his tribe, tales of spirits and rivers, and she taught him words from the Bible, the ones about love and forgiveness. They became unlikely friends in a land still learning how to heal. When the winter snows came, Taza's people sent blankets and smoked meat to her door. When spring returned, Mary's shelter became a gathering place, a rare corner of the West where race and pride were left outside like old coats. Years later, when people asked why she'd risked everything that night, she would smile softly and say, "Because kindness has a way of coming back, sometimes on horseback." In the twilight of her life, long after Colton's ranch was gone and the railroads had carved their way through the wild, Mary would sit on her porch, watching the horizon. She'd see riders now and then, travelers, strangers, wanderers, and she'd think of that dawn when the world seemed to change for a moment. She never married, though some whispered she and Taza shared something deeper than friendship. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. What mattered more was the lesson that lived on after them both, told around fires, in cabins, and even in schools that rose on the old frontier, that one act of compassion can echo louder than the thunder of war. The locals called her, the woman who fed the enemy. But to the Apache, she was something else entirely, white dove of the plains, the woman whose kindness stopped a war before it began. On the last morning of her life, the sky burned gold again, the same color it had been the day she met Taza. A ranch hand who found her said she was sitting upright on the porch, eyes open, smiling at the sunrise. Beside her lay a small bundle wrapped in deerskin, a necklace of turquoise and silver, with a single feather tied to it. No one knew who had left it. Some say an old warrior had ridden through the night to keep his final promise. Others believe it was the wind itself, paying tribute to the woman who had listened to its gentlest whisper, mercy. In the years that followed, travelers still spoke of her. When storms rolled through the valley, they said they could hear distant hoofbeats and the faint cry of voices in the wind, not of anger, but of remembrance. The land where fear once ruled had become a place of quiet reverence. And if you go there today, where her cabin once stood, the locals say wildflowers grow in a perfect circle, as if the earth itself remembers her kindness. For in that barren stretch of the American West, where once there had been hunger, hatred, and silence, one woman's simple act of feeding a starving stranger had changed the story of a people. It proved something truer than all the old tales of conquest and blood. It proved that compassion, once sown, grows deeper roots than hatred ever could. And long after the guns had rusted, after the ranches had faded, after the nations themselves had blurred into one shared horizon, the legend endured, of the ranch maid who chose mercy over fear, and the warriors who came not to destroy her world, but to honor her heart.